Hey you guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be all things C-section, specifically what you can expect before, during the surgery, and then in the recovery room. I'm currently pregnant with my third baby. We are 22 weeks almost, and so just crossed the halfway point, and it will be my third C-section. So for a little bit of context, I had an unexpected emergent C-section with my first, a planned C-section with my second, and then this will be another planned C-section. So my first two experiences were so starkly different. A huge factor in that was obviously that I didn't know it was coming the first time. And the second time around, I had many months to mentally prepare and wrap my mind around it, and I just went about the whole thing a lot different. So I thought it would be helpful as I sort of get in the game for number 3 to just share what it was like for me. So obviously, this is not medical advice in any way. I just wanted to share my experience because going into my second C-section, it was so helpful to watch videos like this. Let's go ahead and get into it. So let's chat about before surgery, kind of the prep work and what it looks like before you go into the operating room. So depending on what your labor looks like, or lack thereof, I guess, it's gonna look very different. So with my first, it started as an induction that was going really smoothly until it wasn't. I think was blocking a lot of it out in the moment. So that before was a little bit chaotic. Switching gears, if you know you are having a C-section or you're planning to have one, which I assume would be most of you that chose to watch this video, the before period with my planned C-section was so good. Like actually so good. You of course have it scheduled, so you know the day and time. We had to arrive at the hospital 2 hours before our scheduled C-section. It is so surprisingly calm. My husband and I were actually just really excited. I had a few nerves flowing for sure, but we walked in and I said, "Hello, I'm here for my C-section." And we just got checked in and taken to a room. I think that's one major perk of having a planned C-section is you just get to show up. Once you get checked in and you get taken to your room, your nurse will ask you 100 questions about your medical history. If you've had previous C-sections, they'll ask a ton about those and how those went and how you responded to anesthesia. And if you had any complications, they really make sure that all the bases are covered so they can be prepared for a successful surgery for you. They put my IV in. I had a site also put in my hand. I hemorrhaged during my first C-section, which I'll talk about in a second, but because we had talked about that, I put an extra site in my hand so that if I hemorrhaged again, they would be ready and have a spot ready and open to give me blood. So after you play 100 questions is what it feels like, you just go into prep mode. And this was actually kind of bizarre because obviously I didn't have it with my first, but you are literally prepping yourself for the surgery. So you get into the gown, they give you an antibacterial wash that you use all over your belly and like down low where your incision will be. And then they also gave me a couple, are they called antiseptic, antibacterial? They're basically to prevent infections. And so I had one that I had to swab in both of my nostrils, and then I drank something or swished something around in my mouth. I can't remember exactly what it was. Once we were all prepped, we really were just waiting for our surgery time. I should have said going into a planned C-section, I did have to fast. In our case, we were scheduled on a Saturday, which is when the on-call OB was there. And so they warned us ahead of time that if any emergency C-section cases came in, of course, they would take priority. And that did actually happen twice or 3 times. So we thought the surgery would be at 9 or 10, and it ended up not being until like 2:15. And so I was just so thirsty the whole time. My nurse did give me some ice chips to kind of hold me over until I would be able to actually drink water post-surgery. And then once we were prepped, everybody that was going to be in the operating room came to our prep room to talk us through their role and what they would be doing in there and kind of what to expect in their little category. They walk through all of the risks. They have you sign some things like if you lose too much blood, can they give you more? They just ask your permission of a lot of things. And that part was slightly overwhelming. I'm not gonna lie. That was the only time for me pre-surgery that I could feel like my blood pressure raise a little bit. And obviously they need to have those conversations with us. So once you're all prepped and you have your IV in and you're clean and ready for surgery and all of your team has talked you through what you're gonna be going through, you get wheeled into the operating room. So let's chat about that. It's time for the actual C-section. And the first thing to be prepared for is that your spouse cannot be with you during the anesthesia. It is a little intimidating going into an operating room alone, like knowing that your husband or whoever is just not with you yet. The operating room is very bright and very cold because there's a lot of people in there. You've met most of them. It's definitely not like a cozy environment, which is how it needs to be because they're doing a major surgery, of course, but the room feels like an operating room. Before your husband or whoever you have comes in, they do, I forget what it's called, but they basically announce themselves and what their role is, and they confirm who I am, and they talk through what's gonna be happening. Then it was time for the spinal block. So for the spinal, you sit up on your operating room table. So you sit with a very curved spine. They give you like a local anesthetic to just numb the area. They administer it, which I couldn't tell you much about, which was very quick. Mine, from the time I sat up to the time they laid me back down, was maybe 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. It was very easy. It just felt like a shot. And immediately I felt my legs feel very heavy. So as soon as the anesthesiologist was done, my nurse helped me lay back, get my feet back on the table, and my legs were numb very, very fast. I know my time probably, like the timing of how it went in my memory is probably not perfectly accurate, but it felt like maybe 2 minutes. My legs were completely numb. But once you're laid down, they put your drapes up, and then everybody is on the opposite side of the drape. So the only people by me at this point were like my nurse was on one shoulder and the anesthesiologist was on the other. You're laying flat with your arms out on the table. Had the site in case I needed blood in my hand. I had a blood pressure cuff, and then I had my IV going in the other arm. My husband could still not come in at this point, and I remember saying a couple times like, please don't forget Jeremy. They were like, we won't forget, we promise. But I just felt like a lot was happening without him being there. They clean you again, and my doctor did a really fantastic job of telling me what he was doing, which I really appreciated. I think I had asked a couple questions pretty early on once I got in the room, so he could probably pick up on the fact that I wanted to know some. He said, making sure you're all numb. Can you feel any of this? And if you were gonna feel something, you would be feeling it, and I couldn't. And so they said, it's time to bring dad in and we're gonna have this baby. And so my husband came in and he had a stool right by me. And I was just kind of telling him like, it's been like, we're good, it's going well, I feel good and I feel calm. And they said like, okay, here we go, we're gonna make the first incision. And they did that. I did not feel that initial incision. I didn't feel anything in the first minute or two. From the time that they open you up to the time that your baby is born is very fast. It surprised me both times, even though this time they did give me a heads up that that would be the quickest part. So I want to say it was maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and I did not feel any of the incision being made at all. However, once I was all opened up and they were getting the baby out, both times, I felt a lot of pressure. So they told me like, okay, we can see your uterus, your baby's almost here, you're gonna feel a lot of pressure. And I felt a lot of pressure. It feels like someone is like pressing down on your rib cage very, very hard. Push down and you can feel like some tugging and pulling. And that feels very bizarre because if you think about what's happening, like envisioning it grossed me out a little bit. The pressure on my ribs was the hardest part. It hurt, not in a sharp pain way at all, but in a like, if there's any more pressure, it felt like my ribs were going to break. And I'm sure that that's not true. I'm sure I was totally fine, but I was very surprised by the amount of pressure that I felt. And And again, my doctor did a great job of talking me through that I would feel some pressure, that everything was very normal and things were going great and looking great. So that did help. But all of that, all of the pressure and the tugging and pulling and everything was only a few minutes, because the baby was born within 5 or 6 minutes, I'm pretty sure. Again, that might not be fully accurate, but I think that was the case. So she was born, they lifted her up over the drape so that I could see her. She started crying right away. She was perfectly healthy. She was a big baby. It feels like a physical rush of peace and joy that come over you when you see that baby, even though you are still in the middle of a very major surgery. Knowing that your baby's here and safe just makes the rest of it so much easier. So once the baby is born and you get to see them, they take them to the other side of the room, still in the operating room in my case, to weigh them and measure them and do all of those initial like testing baby care things. And then they wrap the baby up and bring them to you. I have seen that some people can do skin to skin while you're still on the operating table, which I'm gonna request this time. So I'll let you know if that's something I'm able to do. But with both of my first two, they just wrapped them up. My husband was holding her, brought her over. I held her for a little bit and then let my husband hold her for the remainder of the surgery until it was time to leave. And we just got to talk about her and stare at her and laugh and cry. And it was so sweet. All the while I was being closed up. So from the time that the baby was born until they were completely done putting me back together, right around an hour. This time, the second time around, I did not have any hemorrhaging, so they didn't even need to use that site that they had prepped, which was a huge answer to prayer. Once everything is done, they take the drapes down and they lift you, because you're still fully numb and cannot move yet. They lift you from the operating room table onto the bed that you will use in your recovery room. And then I had the baby and we were rolled out together. So then you get wheeled back into your recovery room. And just like the rest of this, recovery can vary so widely. Some people have really great recoveries. Some people struggle. It really depends on your body and your surgery and probably a million other factors. While you are like snuggled up with your baby, as you're getting wheeled into the recovery room, they're still tracking all of your vitals. For reference, my surgery happened on the 11th and we went home on the 14th, with the option to go home on the 13th, but baby was in the NICU for just a short amount of time and we didn't want to leave without her. So we would have had to stay 2 full days. We ended up staying a third. First day was not horrible, but it was definitely not a walk in the park. You will start taking pain medications, and they also had me on a stool softener because your digestive system is not normal. Cycling through those every few hours, we were able to get my daughter to latch. I breastfed both of my kids, and so we were able to start that like right away when we got into the recovery room, which I was so excited about. We did skin to skin, got to just like talk and hang out while the nurses were checking me. They check your incision, make sure that everything looks good. They do check the amount of bleeding that you've had, and then they press on your stomach, which I'm pretty sure they do for vaginal births too, to encourage your uterus to contract back down. I was very nervous about how that would feel after just having had surgery right below where they were pressing. And to be honest, that first, like those first few hours when your numbing is like starting to wear off, but hasn't fully, and you're kind of still running on adrenaline and everything, they weren't too bad. So I think they pressed, it was maybe every 30 minutes. After they would press, they would check my bleeding and make sure that I wasn't bleeding too much. In the recovery room, for me, it was very difficult to maneuver. So nursing, we were able to get her to latch, which was great. But for me to be comfortable nursing and to have the baby in a good position to be able to latch and do all of that, like a more upright position feels better to me. However, when you're just out of surgery and you can't feel your legs and you can't, like you have no core strength at that point, because you can't even feel everything yet, it was very hard to like move around. That first day, I don't even think I was putting my like arms down to push myself up at all. So the hospital beds obviously can lean up or lean back. And so I relied on that heavily to be able to get in positions that felt good. My spinal block was completely worn off after like 2.5 hours, I think. And so as soon as I could like wiggle my toes and I could bend my knees and things like that, my nurse helped me like sit fully up with my legs off the bed and let me sit for a second. And then she helped me stand up and just stand for a minute, all the while they're watching your blood pressure, making sure that you are doing okay. And then it is time to walk. My nurse held my arm the whole time, and we just walked, I think, to the bathroom and back for my first little outing of the bed. It felt like I physically couldn't stand up straight. I was definitely walking hunched over because it felt like if I stood up straight, like my skin was stretching, and it probably wasn't, but it did not feel good. So I was walking kind of hunched over, taking very slow steps, almost sliding my feet every hour, if not more frequently than that. My nurse would come in and ask me, she would definitely help me, but she would ask if I could take a couple steps, and we went a little further each time. They really stressed that walking is so important to your recovery. Really tried to be intentional about walking as much as I could. My daughter was born at like 2:30-ish. I don't remember the exact timing. It was either late at night or early the next morning when we woke up. They remove your catheter. You basically take a big deep breath and they just pull it right out. It's quick. It does not hurt at all, but it like made me feel the slightest bit queasy. And once your catheter comes out, you have to pee. I was able to pee pretty quickly. I think within an hour or two, maybe, I was able to pee. They have like a measuring cup, a big one, on the toilet for you so that when you sit down to pee, it's all caught. And then they come in and check it to see how much you're peeing and also to check on your bleeding as well. And I did not have the strength or maybe the coordination or a mix of both to pick up the baby from a seated position. Either had to stand up, which required help for me, at least for those first 2 days, and took a lot of effort to get seated and then to stand up and then pick the baby up and then sit back down and then get comfortable again. It was either that or I had to have somebody hand the baby to me, which wasn't a huge deal. Like my husband was right there to hand me the baby whenever I wanted. Middle of the night, if I woke up and my husband was still sleeping, I had to like wake him up to have him pick the baby up to either like take care of that issue or hand the baby to me to feed them. And of course, like my husband was so happy to do that, but I wish that I could have been a little bit more independent, specifically with taking care of the baby in those early days. And for me, that just was not the case. By day 3 that we were still in the hospital, but I think a lot of people would be home on day 3, I was able to do that unassisted. But again, for me, it still took like a very intentional effort. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the video there at the hospital experience. I could do a whole nother video, and maybe I will with this baby, about C-section recovery at home and what that looks like, because I feel like it's a whole different ballgame for having a C-section and are pregnant right now. I hope that this was helpful to you and hopefully encouraging. My planned C-section was actually a really positive experience, and we are, of course, hoping for the same with this baby. And comment below and tell me how far along you are or when your C-section is happening. I would love to hear. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.